Hello and welcome to Nithrania Game Club. My name is Branislav Berec and you're watching Game in a Nutshell, the series of videos designed to teach how to play various board games. Today we're going to learn how to play Paris New Eden, which is a dice drafting game which you can play under an hour. So here is how it plays. Thematically, you are rebuilding the civilization in the city of Paris after some sort of a catastrophe in Europe. The city is covered in a lush vegetation, that's why it's called the New Eden. Now you need to reunite the survivors, represented by these dice, by these tokens, and also on the building cards. And you need to give them proper equipment, which is again represented by these tokens, and it's also printed on the building cards. You have to do it in 1 year, which means in 4 seasons, and that's 4 rounds of the game. There are multiple ways how to score points in this game. First one are these event tiles, and to score victory points from these event tiles, you will have to have survivors and the corresponding equipment in their color in your refuge. Then you can score victory points by feeding the people in your refuge, and for that you will need farmers and farmer buildings or these food cans, and the more people you feed, the more victory points you will score. And finally, you can score victory points from these mission cards at the end of the game. Place the game board in the middle of the table. For each of these 5 locations on the game board, take the indicated number of dice, which is based on the number of players in the game, roll these dice and place them on the location. In a 2 and a 3 player game, return the unused dice back into the box. Then place these canned tokens next to the restaurant location. Place the bed and the binoculars tokens next to this city center location. And in addition, shuffle the equipment tokens, place 3 of them face up to these designated spaces, and then create 3 more piles with 3 tokens each, which will be dealt out in the next rounds. Take the survivor tokens and first set aside these 5 tokens: 1 tinkerer, 1 brawler, 1 healer, 1 sage and 1 farmer. Then shuffle the remaining tokens and again place 6 of them this side up to these designated spaces next to the train station, and then create 3 more piles with 6 tokens each and place them onto these spaces. These are 4 piles of event tiles. Take the first pile for the spring, shuffle them and place them this side up to these 3 designated spaces next to the tower location. Return the unused tile back into the box. You can keep the piles for the upcoming seasons nearby. Finally, place this special token on the designated space. Then shuffle the mission cards and place the deck next to the bridge location. Then take the deck of Tinkerer cards and take these end cards out. Then shuffle both decks separately and then place those end cards on the designated space on the game board. Then place the rest of the Tinkerer cards on top of that deck, and in a 2 and a 3 player game, remove the first 3 cards from the deck and put them back into the box. Then shuffle the other 4 decks separately and place them on their corresponding spaces as well. In a 2 and a 3 player game, draw 2 cards from each deck face up. In a 4 player game, you would reveal 3 cards from each deck. Then each player takes a player board, cube and a disc of the same color, and 3 mission cards from the mission deck from the game board. Place all the cubes onto this space and all the discs on the 0 space of the scoring track. In a 2 player game, you will use all these slots on your player board as indicated by these icons. However, in a 3 player game, you will only use these 6 slots, and you can use this blind token to cover up the unused space. And in a 4 player game, you'll only use 5 slots, so you can also cover this slot. Using those blind tokens is not mandatory, but it's very helpful. Before the start of the game, randomly determine the starting player. Let's say it's the white player, and then the player order continues in a clockwise direction. Now, starting with the last player and then continuing in a counterclockwise direction, each player would choose one of those survivor tokens and place it on their player board. Return the remaining tokens back into the box. Each player will now choose one of those 3 mission cards and place it face down next to their player board, hidden from other players, and then return the other 2 mission cards to the bottom of the mission deck. The game takes place over 4 rounds, 4 seasons, and each season comprises the following 4 phases. In the first phase, players will draft these dice, they will basically gather survivors, and then perform actions which is associated with that location from which they take the survivor. In the second phase, players will acquire buildings which add more survivors and equipment to the player's refuge. And you will need those survivors and equipment for the third phase, in which you will score victory points for these mission tiles and for feeding your people in your refuge. Unlike other games, in this game you're not punished if you don't feed your people, however, you are heavily rewarded if you do so. The fourth phase is just a cleanup phase and the preparation for the next season. In the first phase, players take turns starting with the first player and then going in a clockwise direction. On your turn, choose one of those 5 locations on a game board, take the die and perform the action associated with that location. When you choose a die, take the die and place it into one of the empty slots on your player board, but don't change the face of the die. Dice are survivors in the game with various abilities. These are tinkerers, brawlers, healers, sages, farmers, and these are kind of wild survivors. They can be used as a survivor of any other type. Now we will go through each location in a bit more detail. When you take a die from this restaurant location, also take one of these canned tokens. You can keep the canned tokens either on your player board or somewhere nearby, and they will help you feed your people and score points in the third phase of the round. When you take a die from this city center location, choose one of these 5 available tokens. And again, you can keep the tokens somewhere near your player board. And if you take one of these large tokens, either the binocular tokens or the bat token, you can place them in one of these designated spaces above your player board. These small tokens are equipment tokens, and they are required for scoring of the event tiles in the third phase of the round. This bat token lets you win ties when acquiring buildings, and this binoculars token will make you the first player for the next round. When you take the die from this train station location, choose also one of these 6 available survivor tokens and place both of them on your player board. These survivor tokens act as the temporary dice when acquiring buildings in the second phase of the round. After that, all these tokens will become permanent inhabitants of your refuge. When you take the die from this tower location, choose one of these available event tiles and flip it face down. If you are the first player to do this in a round, take also this special token and place it next to your player board. These event tiles allow players to score victory points in the third phase of the round. Since in all player counts there are 2 dice in this location, 2 of these event tiles will be flipped face down in each round. So at the end of each round there's only 1 tile remaining which will be scored. So by turning these tiles face down, you're narrowing down these options and keeping the tiles which suit you the best. This special token, the heroine token, reduces the requirements of the final remaining tile at the end of the round by 1, but only for the owner of that tile. And finally, when you take the die from this bridge location, draw 3 mission cards, choose one of them, keep it face down next to your player board, hidden from your opponents, and then return the other 2 to the bottom of the mission deck. There are 2 types of mission cards. These are missions and these are buildings. Missions allow you to score victory points at the end of the game. Building cards can be placed into your refuge as regular buildings once you meet the conditions on the left side of that card. In the second phase, players will acquire these buildings. Buildings add more survivors and equipment to your refuge, and some of these farmer buildings can also give you canned tokens, and the tinkerer buildings can give you some special powers. The tinkerer buildings will be acquired first, then the brawlers buildings, healers, sages and farmers. For each type of building, Starting with the player with this binoculars token and then going in a clockwise direction, and for the sake of explanation, this is my clockwise direction. Each player announces their strength, which is the number of dice and survivor tokens of the matching type. Only if you have at least one die or one survivor token of the matching type, you can add wild dice or wild tokens to increase your strength. So the first player has the basic strength of 2, and if they wish so, they can add this die and increase their strength to 3. So after the first player has announced their strength, it's the next player's turn. Although the second player has 2 wild dice and 1 wild token, they cannot use them for the Tinkerer buildings because they have no Tinkerer die or a Tinkerer survivor. So the strength of the second player is 0, and then it's the next player's turn, and they have to announce whether their strength will be 2 or 3. Players must always use all their dice and tokens of the matching type for the current building, even though they would not wish so. However, they are not required to use the wild tokens or dice. So let's say the third player decides not to use this wild token, so their strength is 2. Now, starting with the strongest player, then with the second strongest, and so on and so forth, each player must choose and take one of the buildings and add it to their refuge. Player must take a building, even if they don't like that building. Then discard all the dice used to acquire that building, and all the tokens are placed somewhere on the building cards. These tokens now act as any other survivor printed on the card. Now let's say that the first player announces their strength and it's going to be 3. The third player also decides to use the wild token and their strength would be 3 as well. In case of this tie, the winner is the player with this bad token. However, if that player is not one of those tied players, then it's the next player in a clockwise direction who wins the tie. So in this example, it's the third player who wins the tie and is the first one to choose a building. Again, after acquiring the building, discard all the dice used, and all the tokens will also be placed on the building cards, including the wild tokens, which are now turned into slackers. In 3-player or 4-player games, if all players would have the tokens or dice of the matching type, so in our example we have 3 players with Tinkerer dice or tokens, the weakest player will not be able to take the building. After the Tinkerer buildings have been acquired, continue with the Brawler's building, and so on and so forth. Don't forget, when the player announces their strength, they have to decide immediately whether they use any wild dice or tokens. Once they announce their strength, they may not change it, and then it's the next player's turn, and so on and so forth. Then, when one player is the only player with a certain type of survivors, that player may only take one building, the other one will not be acquired, since no other player has dice or tokens of the matching type. When you add these farmers buildings and that building has a symbol for the can token, take the indicated number of can tokens and place them on the card. When you have a mission card and after placing a building you meet the requirements depicted on the left hand side of that mission card, you can add it as a regular building into your refuge. When you have any leftover wild dice or wild tokens at the end of the second phase, discard all the wild dice. However, all the wild tokens are placed somewhere onto your buildings as slackers. In the third phase of the round, you will score points. First, let's talk about these events. At the end of the round, there's only one tile remaining face up, and that tile indicates the number of people and equipment tokens of the matching type you need to have to score the depicted number of victory points. In this example, you need at least one healer with the corresponding equipment token and at least one brawler with the corresponding equipment token. You can use the survivors and equipment which is either printed on the cards or as the tokens. You don't have to have them on the same card. So if this player would not have this survivor token, that player would have another card with survivors. At this moment they would have 2 survivors and 2 equipment tokens. In order to score victory points from this kind of tile, players would have to have 2 sages with 2 equipment tokens of the corresponding type. and in this case you need 3 survivors and their matching equipment. However, you can use any combinations. So, for example, you can have 3 brawlers with 3 bullets, or you can have 3 sages with 3 books, or you can have 2 brawlers with 2 bullets and 1 sage with 1 book, and so on and so forth. You may not mix survivors and different tokens, so you may not have 3 brawlers and 3 books. That doesn't count. If you have this special heroine token, it counts as 1 survivor and the equipment of the matching type. So if I would need 1 healer and 1 brawler with their matching equipment, but I would only have 1 brawler with the 1 bullet, I can use this special token to replace the missing healer with their equipment. This special token replaces only 1 survivor and the equipment of the corresponding type, not the entire type of survivors. So with this event tile in play, I would still need 1 sage and 1 book to fulfill the requirements. So if you fulfill the requirement, gain the indicated number of victory points and move your marker on the scoring track. After scoring points for the event tiles, you can also score points for feeding your people in the refuge. To better illustrate how it works, let's say we are several more turns into the game. Now, first thing you have to do is count all your survivors in your refuge, including these slackers. So in this case, it's 3, 6, 9, 12, 14 survivors. Now, place your cube on the corresponding spot on this population track, and then the zone in which you have your marker indicates how many farmers you need to have in order to feed your people and gain victory points. In this example, I need 4 farmers. And as this icon indicates, for each missing farmer, I can discard 1 can token. I have 3 farmers on my farmer building card, however I don't have the 4th one, but I have a can token, so by discarding this can token, I have fulfilled the requirement in my zone, so I can score these victory points. If you wouldn't have enough farmers or can tokens to feed your people, nothing happens, you just don't score victory points. Feeding is not mandatory, so if you know you will not be able to feed your people, you don't have to use the can tokens, you may decide not to feed the people at all, and you can keep the can tokens for later rounds to feed larger population and to score more victory points. The 4th phase is the cleanup phase and the preparation for the next round. First, re-roll the dice and place them on the locations. Then add the survivors to the train station. Place the bat token and binoculars token back into their space, and the player who held these binocular tokens is the first player for the next round. Then take the next pile of these equipment tokens and place them on the designated spaces. Remove the event tiles from the previous round, shuffle the event tiles for the next round, and place 3 of them randomly face up on the designated spaces. Return the unused one back into the box. Then return the special heroine tile as well. Finally, return any unclaimed buildings back into the box and draw new buildings. At the end of the 4th season, at the end of the 4th round, the game is over. In addition to the victory points gained over the course of the game, add the victory points from your mission cards, and if you don't fulfill the requirements of some of your missions, just discard them, there's no other punishment, which means you don't lose victory points if you don't fulfill your missions, and if you have the binoculars token, it's also worth 2 victory points at the end of the game. Then the player with the most points is the winner. In this small section of the video, I'll provide 2 small clarifications to the frequently asked question. The first one is related to this Tinkerer card, which allows you to take building from the top of the deck rather than from the display. So, to do this, you must be able to take one of the cards from the display. So you are either the strongest player, or the next strongest, and so on and so forth. This card allows you to take the card from the top of the deck rather than the one in the display. Which means, if you take the card from the top of the deck, the next one would be available for the next strongest player. However, if there are no more buildings in the display and you would be the next strongest player, you are not allowed to take the card from the top of the deck. You simply must be able to take the card from the top of the deck instead of the card in the display. The second clarification is related to these mission cards, since the wording for these mission cards in the rulebook might be a little misleading. The rulebook says that if you have at least 2 pairs of each type of equipment, which actually means if you have at least 2 equipment of each type. So if you have at least 2 books, 2 bullets and 2 pills, you will score 4 victory points. The same applies to these survivor tokens if you have at least 2 survivor tokens of each type, meaning if you have at least 2 sages, 2 brawlers, 2 slackers, 2 healers, 2 tinkerers and 2 farmers, then you score 4 victory points. And that's it, that's how you play Paris New Eden. If you would have any questions or comments, please put them into the comment sections below. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. If you like the series, please subscribe. My name is Branislav Berec, you've been watching Game in a Nutshell, and hope to see you next time.